Hello class and welcome to today's lecture. Today we're going to be talking about the performance appraisal process. So let's get started. There's two concepts that you should be familiar with when it comes to performance appraisals. One is the performance management process. This refers to the process used to identify, encourage, measure, and evaluate employee performance. It also includes how you reward employees. So we're talking here about the policies, procedures, and rules that a company designs around their performance management process. And then you have the actual performance appraisal. So this is the actual evaluation that employees undergo, which tells them how well their work performance is behaving or how well their work performance is in the workplace. How well have you delivered against the set objectives that your job is supposed to fulfill. Most commonly, when we think about the performance appraisal, we think about sitting down with the manager and reviewing, typically at least once a year, the work that you've done and how that compares to the objectives you're supposed to complete throughout the year. This is the overall process outlined on this slide. It always starts, once again, with the organizational strategies and where the organization is trying to go, who they're trying to be, what their key initiatives are that year. That's fed into the performance management process, which then the employee understands what they're supposed to do, and they actually engage in their performance. From there, you look at the outcomes of the employee's performance, and you compare that against what they're supposed to do, and you give them their evaluation. You apply any rewards or disciplinary action as necessary, and then from there, you look at the organizational awards. So here we're kind of looking at across all employees, so at the organizational level, across all employees, if they did what they were supposed to do, then the organization should have accomplished what it set out to accomplish that year as well. And then you start the process all over again. The process of the performance appraisal, as I mentioned earlier, starts with understanding the corporate strategy. And this ties directly into management by objective, which we discussed in a previous chapter. So kind of once again reiterating similarly to what was on the previous slide, the employee looks at the organizational strategy, typically as outlined by his or her manager if the company is using management by objectives, and they identify what it is that they're going to focus on for that time period, that year, that 6-month period, however the organization is structured. Most commonly it's a year. They provide performance direction, and then the employee encourages the employee to participate. Then you assess the job performance. So this here is part of the actual performance appraisal process. So the manager assesses the overall performance of the employee, and then they conduct the formal appraisal. So this is where the manager is sitting down and revealing the results to the employee about how he or she performed. And then it's a process. So then it goes right back to identifying the performance expectations for the following year. Effective performance management systems require 4 things. One is that you make clear the organizational expectations and goals. 2, you provide performance information to the employees. 3, you must document this performance. Believe it or not, the performance appraisal process is the most controversial process and is oftentimes at the center of any employee-related lawsuits. And then lastly, identify areas of success and where people need to improve their performance. The performance criteria for appraisals, what we're discussing on this slide, are actual things that managers can measure to evaluate the performance of any employee. So these are some examples. You could look at the quantity or the amount of products someone was supposed to produce. Did you produce the right number of widgets, for example? Timeliness, was it done on time? Did you do it within the parameters that were expected of you? Efficiency, did you complete the work using the least amount of resources necessary? Effectiveness, did your work result in the outcomes that you were supposed to achieve? Presence on the job, so your attendance, were you on time to various meetings? Were you there when you were supposed to be there? And then the quality, was the work that you did it meet the quality standards as outlined by the organization? There are 2 really big differences when it comes to evaluating a person. One is trait-based information, and the other is results-based information. Okay. You also have behavioral, which is kind of a blend of the two. But when we look at evaluating a person's performance, we have to decide what we're going to pull out and say, hey, you did good on these things or you did poorly on these things. We can base those elements that we're going to evaluate based off of a person's traits. And you can see that if we use traits, it's considered less useful. It's less useful, more controversial, more debatable, and can also lead to more lawsuits. If you look at traits, we're talking about a person's attitude, their effectiveness when it comes to teamwork, their communication, their creativity. So when we give the evaluation, we're like, I don't think your creativity was as high as it should have been this year, or you just could have been a better team player. Well, how exactly do we measure those things? How can we quantify and measure those so that it's not controversial? So that the employee, like, yeah, you're right, I wasn't a good team player, or yeah, you're right, my creativity could have been better. Trait-based information is very abstract. It's very difficult to measure in any meaningful way, very difficult to quantify. So you'll find that a lot of companies stay away from trait-based evaluations. The next you have would be behavioral based, which is evaluating a person off of the behaviors, the actions that they take, that they take during the year. So it could be, did you answer the phone on time? Or what's your customer satisfaction rating? So maybe it's a call center and you ask every customer to complete a survey at the end of the call and you ask them how well they're satisfied. And that feeds into a person's annual evaluation. The timeliness of responses. So behaviors. How quickly did you respond to this email, for example? And results-based information. Now this is the most tangible, the most quantifiable, the most defensible is results-based. So I'm going to say, did you get X number of sales this year? Did your actions result in this particular outcome? Did you reduce costs by 30%? That was your job. So you'll find that organizations and managers, they prefer to use results-based information because simply it's more useful. It's easier to quantify, it's easier to defend, and it's less controversial. So you tend to get less lawsuits and less employee dissatisfaction with the appraisal process when you have results-based evaluation. When you're selecting the criteria that you're going to evaluate an employee by, it's important that you have certain factors in mind. So if you go back to the slide we just talked about, and let's say we're going to use results-oriented criteria to evaluate our employee, you want to ask yourself 3 questions. One is this measure appropriate? Is it deficient? Right? If a measure is deficient, that means it's not really appropriate and it should not be used to evaluate employees by. It just doesn't capture the information that's necessary. You should ask yourself a second question. Is the measure contaminated? This means that it's influenced by other factors that the employee may not have been able to control. So that while it is useful as a evaluation criteria, but it's contaminated. It's not exactly a fair measure. And the last question you want to ask yourself is it overemphasized? Am I making one measure more important than it really should be? So maybe it is, did you answer every email within 5 minutes? Well, just how important is that metric? And how much weight am I giving that in the evaluation process? So you want to make sure you have things weighted appropriately. This slide here outlines the structure of the traditional performance management, performance appraisal process. So if you look at it here, you have the performance appraisal process, and you can see that the HR department, they're the ones that design the entire system. They design the process that managers use, and they train managers on how to use the performance appraisal process. Next, managers review their ratings and they coach, they provide coaching. So managers are actually the people that are going in and conducting the evaluations. And then lastly, that information is shared with the employee. They're given feedback, they're given goals, they are giving encouragement, they are given corrective or disciplinary actions if required. So taking a closer look, the HR unit, They design and maintain the appraisal system. They record and document everything. They train the hiring managers on how to perform the appraisal process. They review completed appraisals looking for consistency or looking for inconsistency so they can bring that up and get that corrected before it turns into a problem. The hiring managers, they typically rate the employees. They're the ones that actually gives the evaluation. They review the evaluation with employees and they identify areas for where the employee can improve or do better. You may be asking yourself, why are performance appraisals important? Well, they serve two functions really. One is administrative and the second is developmental. So as it comes to administrative, employee performance process, it actually documents how that employee performed his or her work. And it can be used for promotions, adjustments to a person's compensation, dismissal from work if they're doing a bad job, or transfers to another position. When it comes to developmental, this is where the hiring manager really steps in, but it can be used to help a person progress in their career, identify areas where they need coaching and mentoring, identify their strengths and weaknesses so they can continue to improve themselves within the organization. The performance appraisal process is very important and has a number of benefits. One is that it increases operational competence. It helps employees simply perform better. It keeps the organization compliance with the law. It can enhance corporate growth. It heightens transformational process and performance and provides answers to a wide array of work-related questions about how to actually improve job performance. As I mentioned earlier, the performance appraisal process is arguably the most controversial part of HR when it comes to employees and fending off employee-related lawsuits. So you want to make sure that your employee appraisal process follows the laws and doesn't violate any EEO regulations, that people are being evaluated based on their jobs, duties, and responsibilities, that all information is documented and stored and kept safely, and that it's reviewed periodically to make sure that it's in compliance with the law and that there's no problems. When conducting a performance appraisal, you can get information on the employee from a number of different sources. So this slide here highlights some of the more common places where hiring managers go to get information about the employees. One is the supervisor, him or herself. Next would be any employees that report to the person that's being evaluated, any team members. You should also ask the employee, him or herself, to evaluate how they feel they're doing or have done. And then you could ask outside companies, clients perhaps, how the customer's done. This is what's called a 360-degree evaluation when you're going to multiple sources, including the employee, him or herself, and asking them to evaluate themselves. We call that a 360-degree performance review. So I go to team members, I go to employees, I go to the manager provides feedback, the employee himself provides feedback, and you may even talk to clients. So this is what we call a 360-degree performance appraisal process. Once again, this slide here kind of reemphasizes the idea of the 360-degree appraisal process. And let me just say this, one of the reasons why it's important to engage in a 360-degree review is because you're getting feedback from multiple sources, which makes your appraisal process much more balanced. Let's say, for example, a manager didn't like their employee, and the manager is the only person providing information on the evaluation. Well, then the biases that manager has can actually translate into the performance appraisal itself. And that's something that you don't want to have. So you want to reduce the odds of any kind of unfair biases being targeted at the employee. And one of the best ways to do that is to get information from a variety of sources. It could be coworkers, managers, subordinates, the employee, him or herself, and also customers and clients. As a manager, and you're going to actually give a performance appraisal, there are some things that you should do and some things that you should absolutely not do. You should be prepared before the interview. You should focus objectively on their performance. Don't make it personal. You should provide a future plan for improvement, developing and coaching. And also when you're going through the process, be sure to emphasize where the employee has done well, where their successes are. It's kind of like human nature where we tend to hear the negative things much more loudly than we do the positive things. So knowing that this is a reality, don't harp on the negative things as much. but talk about what they've done well, and then also discuss where they could improve, but don't frame it in such a way to be overly harsh. If you simply say, here's some areas where you need to improve, the employee will hear that and most likely will hear it in a much louder voice than they heard the compliments. Some things you should absolutely not do. Do not talk too much. Allow the employee to respond. Allow them to share how they feel. Don't berate or lecture the employee. Do not focus totally on the negative parts of what a person's job is or what they've done poorly on. Right? Don't think that the employee has to agree with you. This is a big opportunity for that whole agree to disagree thing, but don't use those words. So state your opinion, state the results. If the employee disagrees, that's okay. They're entitled to their own opinion. And don't compare the employee to other workers. This could create hostility between the two workers. There's some advantages that we should also consider as it relates to employees rating their managers. It helps the managers to stay competent. It helps the managers to know that basically helps them to feel accountable, that they're going to have to answer to their employees, and they're going to have to explain how they treated their employees and how effective they were at their management. There's some disadvantages to rating managers, having employees rate managers. One is negative reactions by the manager to the rating. If they rate it poorly, the manager could respond in an unhealthy way toward the subordinates. And subordinates could actually fear some kind of reprisal. So this may affect what they say, and they are unwilling to give realistic responses. That wraps it up for this lecture. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to send me an email. Thank you very much. Have a good day.